jumps out at me the most when I look at this body of work. I like the high contrast, photograph at night. I like the shadows that go diagonally across the composition. We have this plant in the foreground, then we have Marck, then we have more plants. I do kind of wish these, I don't know, they don't bother me too much, but I kind of want to make them straight up and down. But it's probably parallax from the camera, distortion from a wide angle lens, I'm going to guess. Yeah, 18 millimeter lens, so that's for a pretty wide angle typically on a SLR. F22, 4 seconds, so long exposure. And a large aperture, and we can see that. Well, this is in focus, Marck's in focus, this back here is in focus. Most everything in here I think is focus. Marck's a little blurry because of the 4-second exposure. I'm not sure if I'm bothered or if I like that or I think it works. I really like the composition, I like the lighting and the contrast and all those things we've talked about. I'm not sure if I'd like it more if he were sharp or if I kind of like the blur, or maybe it'd be better with a little more blur. And that's kind of what we're exploring with the second project here. So anyways, this photograph jumps out at me and I react positively towards it. I do think maybe, playing with that figure in the blur could maybe make it a little bit better. I don't know, you never know. This one and the next one I think are very similar. This one is underexposed. We can see how dark it is, f22 at 4 seconds, so we actually would need more time on this composition. This one we can see is f5.6 at 2.5 seconds. So if we count out, we measure in photography stops of light is how we measure things. So from 22 to 11 is 1 stop. 11 to 8 is 2 stops, 8 to 5.6 is 3 stops. So we have 3 more stops of light there, but we have less time, almost half as much time. So really there's a 2-stop difference between these two photographs. So we have 4 times as much light, because every stop doubles the light, 4 times as much light in this image as this one, and you can see that this here is the proper exposure. I like the composition, I like the gaze, I like the action, the drink, I like all this background information. The colors may be off a little bit. I don't know if this is under a tungsten light or something. It might be a daylight setting. I don't know if we get that information. Flash did not fire, and that's good. We could look at, that's one thing I didn't check out, is the ISO. Somewhere down here will be the white balance. That's something else you could pay attention to, because different color lights will make your photographs different colors. Sunlight, tungsten, fluorescent, flash, those are all slightly different colors of light. So it's best to set for them. Auto white balance usually does a pretty good job, but there are some points where that can fail quite badly. Anyways, I like this composition, except Marck's out of focus here. And it might be that he moved. He may actually be in focus, like the arm, the drink, and the shirt looks in focus, and just his head moved a little bit. I like I don't know, I almost look more back here because of how sharp that is, so it draws more attention there. I almost would like a even more narrow depth of field on this. You go to 2.8 and zoom in like a 100 millimeter lens and get the focus sharply on him, and we might actually be able to get the background information softer and just a much narrower depth of field. Anyways, I do like the composition. It does have some technical issues. This one's kind of curious. It looks like they're surfing on this purple board here in the green grass and clover. This one was also kind of similar. So now we see the ironing board. It becomes much more distinct about that. Kind of an interesting idea. I'm not sure which one I like better. I think both have some interesting parts, but I think they also have some problems. I kind of like this where I don't see the face and I get more caught up in the action. Looks like just getting up on the board. I've never surfed in my life, but watched and have friends who surf. But so that's how it feels to me. Yeah, so I kind of like this where I see the activity going on here. And I don't get an identity, so I'm more focused on this. But everything's a little bit soft. Things are a little bit focused. Actually, it looks like your focus is back here, and I'm not sure if your camera focused back there. Sometimes it's better if we take things off auto and manually focus things. And you just got to pay attention, get it focused, set your timer, or have somebody do it. I'm actually a little distracted by this thing back here. If I got rid of that, I think I'd like this more. It'd be like surfing on the grass and the clover. For some reason, that distracts me a little bit. That's one of the issues, though, with photography is dealing with reality is the challenge. So, I mean, I don't know if that thing's movable, if it's big and heavy and or just a pain in the butt to move. You know, it might be easier to Photoshop out or something like that. But, you know, I think there are other technical issues with the image. It's probably not worth a whole lot of effort. But there's a whole lot of stuff going on here that's interesting. It just doesn't all come together. I think ultimately that's one thing that about photography is everyone has a camera, and the camera makers continually want to make it easier and easier and easier to take good quality photographs. So how do we take photographs? How do we get things that rise above? Well, you have to take care of all the details. You have to understand everything technically, but you also have to understand conceptually as well as culturally and formats and all that stuff. Bring it all together to, you know, is it better on Flickr? Is it better on Instagram? Is it better on, you know, a Snapchat sort of image? Or, you know, where do we present these things can also have an impact. Yeah, I kind of like the play here. I think I'd crop this out because, again, that's kind of distracting. I also like it better without the building. I don't find that too distracting, but I kind of like the idea of, you know, surfing. I visualize surfing and being on the ocean and nothing else around except water. So I'd like it being nothing else but all this green. Here we see, you know, this is actually light entering the lens, and we get what we could refer to as lens flare. If you actually look at this one here, we can see that the light that comes in when it flares, it actually takes the shape of your aperture. So this is actually what the aperture inside the camera looks like. It's not a perfect circle. It's made up of, you know, just square pieces of metal that kind of close in as we turn that aperture ring. So anyways, interesting artifact. All right, well, those are some thoughts for you, Mark. We are going to go back, and I'll probably do 3 or 4. Well, I like to keep these about, you know, 10 to 15 minutes. So we'll do a few of them here, and I'll remember to copy that URL, and I can just type that in. All right, so next we are going to look at Kate Farley's images, and hopefully Kate has an album right here. Looks like we've got one right here. All right, so looking at these images, I see we have a whole lot here. The ones that jump out at me as I scroll down, I like the idea of playing with the mirror here. I like this image. I like how that's framed. These are all, you know, might be something going on. They're kind of dark and underexposed. Dark, dark. You see, yeah, see, this one's dark and much better exposure than the other one. And these are kind of interesting with the mirror. So underexposed, underexposed, underexposed. You know, if we look at this compared to the previous one, I kind of like this. You know, there's like the startling. It's a selfie, but it's a very almost, I don't know if it's self-conscious or more unself-conscious selfie. It seems like a more honest sort of look as opposed to the, you know, the cheesy big smile that we often paste on our selfies. So this image in that regard kind of, you know, why are we documenting ourselves here? You know, we always want these photographs to be happy, but here there seems to be something more serious on it. So I actually kind of like the questions. It kind of draws me in and makes me think a little bit more than just, oh, look, somebody's smiling. If we take a look technically here, and we are 5.6 at 250th of a second, and we go here, we are at 16 at 250th second, so that's, you know, 5.6 to 8, 8 to 11, 11 to 16, 3-stop difference. The ISO also plays a role in this, so I don't know if it was, if we're lucky it's the same. I won't have to count more, but 3200, it's actually 2800. That's not quite a full stop, so we'll just kind of ignore that. So we got about 3-stop difference here, and we can see here the outside is exposed well, and in the previous image the interior is what we're exposing for. So, and even the interior information here is just slightly underexposed. I think it's actually probably a pretty good balance, because if we get this perfectly exposed from the interior, this is just going to be white. So, you know, I think as far as balance-wise, this is a pretty good exposure. So the cameras cannot record as many stops of light as we can see. I think humans have like 11 stop difference. Cameras can record maybe half, maybe 2/3 of that information. So we often have to, that's another abstraction within the camera, is cameras see differently than our eyes see. Our eyes can actually see more. I thought I clicked go back to the album. So, there we go. All right, so I'm gonna come down here. I did kind of like. I don't know if I commented on this one. I thought I maybe commented on one of these earlier. But there is something I like in this. I like the sort of almost voyeuristic feel that we get. Photography in many ways is a very voyeuristic medium because we're looking in on people's lives or things and documenting in, and this has that feel because she feels unaware of the camera, so it has that feel. But I kind of like it. It seems like a sort of honest moment, and maybe that's one of your strengths here, Kate, is your ability to to capture these images that feel kind of impromptu. So this one again, I really like the framing. And I also like, as I look at this further, again, your gaze at the camera has this sort of intensity to it, and it's really nice actually how the cat is kind of looking at in the same direction. So it really pushes the viewer to consider what are they looking at, and it's like the camera, what's going on. I really also like that we got these columns. Sometimes we take these images like this, and if the camera's pointed up or tilted, you did a really good job of getting the horizon line square, and that's one of my pet peeves. But also you got these vertical columns, very nice and straight and vertical, and I think those details make a difference. Like I said, everyone's got a camera, everyone's taking photographs, and that might be a slight exaggeration, but how do you separate yourself? You got to pay attention to all the details, and I think you did that very well in framing this photograph. So I am drawn into this image as well. All right, we'll look at maybe this series here of 3 and talk about them. That one, we have a narrow depth of field. I think they probably all do. And here the focus is on the outside. I think I actually prefer, oops, too many browser windows open. I actually prefer, I think I can't decide if I prefer this one or this one. This is kind of interesting because it's like you're seeing that thing. It's almost like you're getting ready to photograph. Of course, this is the photograph, but it doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel like a selfie when I look at these, because Kate is not, her eye gaze does not engage me as a viewer, so it feels like she's looking at something else, trying to capture something else, and we're actually seeing a photograph of her seeing this other thing. I'm playing with mirrors, water, reflections are a lot of fun because, we have this reflected, this is all reflected information. Then we also have this real, quote unquote, sort of real information, non-reflected information that we get. I almost maybe would like a little bit more of that. So I kind of like the structure and the playfulness of this image. Like technically it's like, I want some information in the sky, but that's not possible because you're exposing for something inside the car and shadows here. So there's this limitation of the camera. And we'd have to do something like that via Photoshop or GIMP or some post-production work. But I think that's the sort of stuff that would take to make this image even more impactful and get more people to react to it. So, yeah. All right, well, there are some thoughts for you, Kate. Let me move along here and try and get one more person in. Hopefully I can keep this video under 20 minutes. Don't want to use too much. They load quicker and it just goes quicker if I shorter. But all right, so here we're looking at John's images. He went straight up grayscale with all these, which I'm okay with. Every one of these is piquing my curiosity. I like that you narrowed it down to just a few images. That's one thing as a photographer. A good photographer is often said a good photographer is nothing more than a good editor. So I think you've selected some images that have a good impact. I really like this image. I love the shadow. It feels ghosty, it almost feels photoshopped or something, but I think we're just looking straight up at shadows. I like the PBR and the shadow and the door and it's composed really well and interesting, and you got your horizon lines up, and this is an image I like quite a bit. Nice photograph. I really don't want to change anything in there. This one is interesting as well. A pretty nice black and white portrait. It's not. I think the other one has, for me, it's more abstract. It leaves more questions. This one I think is interesting, but the other one is, to me, far more interesting. Actually, I like this image a little bit better than the previous one. I like the looking down. You seem less aware of the camera. It seems more like a candid moment. Almost, it seems like a street photograph, what we refer to as this genre of street photography, going out there and finding things and recording people and events that are just happening and bringing them to the light of the viewer. Yeah, I like this image. And there's a good exposure here too. See how there's nice detail in here? We don't have these blacks, aren't just blocky, black, inky things. We want to avoid that. A good exposure has some texture in the shadows and some texture in the highlights, and this photograph does that. So it's well exposed. I don't know if you've manipulated it in Photoshop or GIMP or something else to get that, or maybe it came out of the camera that way. But it's well executed technically, compositionally, and it seems like an interesting photograph, something that offers a few more questions. I like the playfulness of this. I like, I want maybe just a little bit more texture. I don't know if I want more texture. This is the thing, like I feel like this is just a little blown out, but I kind of like the harshness, difference between this and this. I almost want a little more contrast in this shadow. That would probably have to be required through post-production means. Because if you push the contrast, just pushing contrast is a post-production element, but if you just did it globally, where we did the whole image, this whites out here would quickly just be gone and technically would be wrong. So this is one you'd actually have to select the shadow area and do a local adjustment just on that area and not affect this out here, and we could get a little more richness in there. I don't know that that is absolutely necessary, but I really would be curious to see if it just had a little more richness if we did something like that. But overall, I would say good job. These images are all engaging, interesting. I didn't have a chance to look at your aperture and shutter speed stuff, but nothing ever seemed to be an issue. So it's not too important, but if you want some input on that or have any problems with that, it doesn't look like you are, but if you have any questions, let me know. All right, we will end that, and I'll make another video for some other people.